don't want to waste any time because we have an amazing guest today. I want to bring him in. Attorney Ron Coleman is a partner in the Dillon Law Group based in Newark, New Jersey. He's known for his work as trademark, commercial, and litigation lawyer, notably his successful representation of Simon Tam of rock band The Slants in the historic U.S. Supreme Court free speech case of Mattel versus Tam. Very active on social media, especially Twitter, and has a podcast called Coleman Nation. So thank you so much, Ron, for coming on with us. You got my husband here now, too.
There we go.
So I want to tell you first, I discovered you on the Dark to Light podcast, Friends with Tracy, and I so enjoyed listening to you because I'm like, this guy's so fun. Yeah, I really enjoy your commentary and your delivery, and so thank you for coming on. Although, of course, I always want to keep things fun, but we have some hard topics to cover today. Start with your background. How did you work for the Dillon Law Group? How did that partnership get started?
Well, Harmeet and I have been aware of each other for a number of years. Before. We both work in the First Amendment space, and because of my work in the Supreme Court case in Mattel versus Tam, became a little bit more known to people who practice in that area. When I got more involved, largely because of the Tam case in Twitter, Harmeet became a little bit more aware of my work and the kind of stuff that I was doing, and she began to consider if perhaps I might be the kind of person who could carry the flag for the Dillon Law Group, which is located, its main office is in San Francisco, on the East Coast. After I left my last firm, which showed me the door after I filed a lawsuit against Black Lives Matter, and they, what's the term I think they say in Latin? Pissed their pants over the prospect of what people might think of them for suing the esteemed organization that we've all come to respect and revere. On very short notice, as I say, I was shown the door. And before I had a chance to lick my wounds, Harmeet swooped in and said, let's do this. And that was 3 years ago, and we've had some very interesting adventures since then.
I'm so glad you told me that because I didn't know that about you. It's a fascinating story, and it's funny that you say esteemed Black Lives Matter. I mean, because now we know so much more about, how none of that funding practically went back to the Black communities. Yeah. Funding mansions, etc. But I really do want to hit the Israel-Palestine topic because I know that you've been especially passionate about it, especially being an Orthodox Jew. But before we do dive into that, just to finish out this topic, I wanted to ask you about the status of the RNC, just because Harmeet, I interviewed her when she was running for chair. It still seems like such a mess. There's even division on whether it's a good thing if it's a mess or not. Like, oh, this is great because we're weeding out the rhinos, and then others are like, we need to get our ish together. Before we get your opinion on that, I saw this just recently that surprised me. I didn't see this coming. Kevin McCarthy coming out. So if we could take that video real quick and then we'll come back.
My focus is to get Jim Jordan elected Speaker, get this Congress back moving again. Right. It's one thing to get elected, it's another thing to govern. Look, I realize how difficult it is. It took me 15 rounds. We were very successful in those times of being Speaker. First time a Republican majority has passed a border security bill all the way back to Ronald Reagan. Right. We passed a bill to make it.
Speaking of firsts, it was also a first for him to get ousted, but I don't know how you feel about all that. I was surprised that he was actually putting, I don't know if that was genuine or not. I actually don't know where you stand on this at all. So go ahead and let us know.
Well, I will tell you that I am among those who thought that Matt Gaetz did the right thing in leading this charge. I understand the countervailing arguments. I understand that there's a certain stability and a certain realism that you have to have about getting things done in Washington, and that Kevin is very well connected and all the things. Having said that, he made a series of very, very specific and very important promises to the group that was challenging him, and he didn't keep them. And there is a real sense among Republicans, conservative Republicans in particular, I don't know if I really wanted to use the term MAGA, and America First has gotten, I think, besmirched with certain associations, unfortunately. But folks like you and me, okay, who are feeling very much that Republicans in Congress are not really doing what we expect them to do, notwithstanding how narrow their majority is in the House. It is a majority, and there are things that Kevin McCarthy promised and didn't deliver on. We need not necessarily, those things are important, but what's even more important is a sense that we're going somewhere and that we're not being constantly played. So the video that you just played is a surprise to me as well. And I find it to be an outstanding example of impressive statesmanship on Kevin McCarthy's part. If in fact, look, these days we're not allowed to believe anything we see, right? Everything's a government operation. All media has been faked. But having said that, it didn't look like a particularly deep fake, and I wouldn't associate you with putting one like that together. So the fact that he sort of through the back door basically endorsed Jim Jordan, who I think would be, if he could get a jacket that fits him, my understanding is that he doesn't get dressed for work because he doesn't really have a good tailor. But assuming that he got this promotion, maybe someone can set him up and he could get dressed for work. At that point, then I think it would be an outstanding leader for the GOP, in the House.
Yeah, it's a scary time because I kept on thinking of the verse, the second state of man could be worse than the first. When this came down, we still don't know what kind of backhand deals could be played with Democrats. And I mean, that's the cynicism in me. Like, did McCarthy just say this because he's already worked things out with Democrats so that it won't happen? Then he'll have to look like a martyr. I don't know. My mind goes all.
In other words, no matter how good the news is, we have to find some way of worrying about it being a sign.
Of course.
I think your average American feels the sentiment of Matt Gaetz. I'd like to hope Matt Gaetz truly does feel that way to make that move. But, you talk to people across all, people are fed up. They're fed the stories that they are. They're scrolling, down X or Twitter or whatever, right? And seeing their feeds and trying to base their views off it. But I think people, quite frankly, are pissed off. Mm-hmm. So, I don't think McCarthy really has a choice but to move that direction. So it is interesting to see that video, as you said. I mean, it would be a nice act of statesmanship if that's legitimate.
Did my heart some good.
Yeah. So wanted to dive into the Israel-Palestine conflict. I know that your hand's been on this as well. Just to review for, because this is ever changing, but Discern Report kind of was able to summarize some things, saying we're literally on the brink of an apocalyptic war between Israel and Iran, because Iran's now threatening to get directly involved in the conflict. Netanyahu indicating more attacks on Gaza imminent, but if Israel goes in, Hezbollah already indicating they will almost certainly enter the conflict. And Iranian foreign minister is saying that Iran will respond if Israel's attack and has even threatened America with heavy losses. So this just continues to heat up and get more involved. And so what do you see happening now?
I'm a simple country lawyer. I don't have any particular insight into global strategic matters. My take, though, as an observer of international relations for many, many years, is there's definitely brinksmanship being practiced by Iran here. It is very ambiguous what exactly the Biden administration intends for those carrier groups that have been sent to the region or that are in the region. I find it very hard to trust the Biden administration with anything connected to the Middle East. It's biased towards Iran. I don't want to say it's a holdover from the Obama years. It's actually a continuation of the Obama years. Is well known. I believe that Israel is prepared for a war with Iran over this. I think Iran is much more likely to be the one bluffing here. And contrary to that editorial note in that article that you flashed up on the screen, I think there is zero chance that China fires a shot in anger here. They have no reason whatsoever to get themselves involved in a regional conflict, other than profiting by it in opportunistic ways, as China and Russia will do, as the situation, as the case may be, selling arms and cutting deals. But I also not aware that China really has any meaningful military assets that would have an impact on such a conflict. I don't think there's any chance, certainly, that they would threaten the United States with a direct attack if the U.S. were to get involved as a result of Iran's involvement. I would hope the United States would not get involved, even if Iran does get involved, because escalation is a serious thing. I think it's not good for Israel or good for the United States or American Jews or other Jews around the world for the United States to go to war because of a war involving Israel. Israel can take care of itself. It is really unfortunate that the United States has done so much to enable Iran to be as powerful and as great of a threat as it is. The Iran nuclear deal is one of the great stains on American diplomatic and foreign policy, as well as a constitutional problem, because there was no Senate ratification of what was really amounted to a treaty. It's a terrible mess, and we see here, by the way, how even these seeming domestic or technical or institutional issues such as governance and deterioration of governing norms have these effects that manifest themselves in world politics. A lot of lives are not only potentially at stake, but have already been lost as a result of some really bad policy making. Who is making policy right now in the White House?
Yeah.
It can't be Joe Biden.
Sure.
He is
Yeah,
incapable of doing it. Who is making these decisions?
my father's a back in the day kind of Kennedy Union Democrat. He'll still be that way till he dies. Last time he came to visit me in Christie, I remember him telling me in Christie, I guess I could believe the president actually doesn't run anything after kind of seeing this whole debacle with Joe Biden, because he's not cognitively there.
In his better days, Biden was a decently hawkish Democrat.
And he could at least plagiarize them.
Right. There was a transition before he became a zombie, where I guess he got the message that in order to get this gig, he simply was going to have to take orders. And, while he still had the cognitive ability, let's say 3 or 4 years ago, he already stopped being even the Joe Biden that he was, because he's never been a particularly principled political figure. But he did have his views, and and they were relatively, he was not by any stretch of the imagination the most left-wing Democrat, but the Democratic Party today is fairly monolithic. They will not depart from the party line. They have party discipline in a way that Republicans never will. They're a Bolshevik-style party in that regard, a European-style, party where instructions for voting come down, and that has been criticized even from the far left. People who have observed that, notwithstanding many of the unpleasant things that have come out of the mouths of the members of the so-called squad, that they pretty much vote party line on almost every issue. So Democrats will always have that strength. It's a strength and a weakness. When it comes to political showdowns, it's a strength, and there have been a lot of those. But I do have a lot of concern over who's making the decisions. That's another constitutional crisis for us to follow, to be aware of. It's parlous times in our country and in the world.
Now, you talk about how they're always in lockstep, but again, we talked about all of the infighting that's been happening within the Republican Party and even in the punditry. And I wanted to see what you thought about the infighting that's really been spurred on with this Israel-Palestine conflict. You have these popular conservative hosts that are tearing into each other. Charlie Kirk's now being accused of being an anti-Semite for suggesting Israel knew more before this all went down. What do you think about that? Are you personally rethinking some people that you maybe listened to and supported now that because of their stances?
Yeah, I mean, there are people who have really look. I understand the skepticism about governments. I understand everyone being more aware than ever. Then there are lots of very sophisticated messaging operations underway, as has always been the case involving war. And I do think it's a mistake, as my friend and client Chaya Raichik, Libs of TikTok, tweeted yesterday, to accuse everyone who takes a highly skeptical view of the Israeli point of view on this to call them anti-Semites. It is always the case that when someone applies a standard, either indifference towards Israeli casualties or offense over Israeli conduct that they would not apply to any other country, you have to wonder what their motivation is. But being skeptical of the need or the advisability of American troops being involved, or being skeptical about government reporting of atrocities, which are always used in war as ways to justify policy. That's just historically true. To jump from there to calling someone like Charlie Kirk, who's not an anti-Semites, is really bad. It's as we say, it's bad for the Jews. Now, having said that, there are people who have fallen, I think, on the far side of that line, who've disappointed me a great deal, and I haven't had it out with them. I don't want to roll that way. There are people who I've had on my show, people who I've been friendly with for years, who have come across as absolute heels, suggesting that atrocity evidence has been faked, that they don't really believe it's true. When I see the use of the word genocide as a way of describing how Israel is responding to the Hamas attack, that's usually a flag that the person involved is not being intellectually honest. Genocide is not remotely implicated here, and it's an incredible moral inversion of what's going on here. So I have lost some friends. I have, on the other hand, retained a lot of friends. There are a lot of people who have been unfairly accused, who I know and I understand where they're coming from. They're doing what they do, which is they ask hard questions and they're risking offending people. But it's a big deal to call somebody an anti-Semite when you don't have a good reason for it. And there's been a little bit too much of that going on, and not only online, but in conversations that I have with people. People are on edge. There is a real sense that this wasn't just another terrorist attack, as if we should be used to terrorist attacks. Unfortunately, we have gotten used to them, which is a policy goal of terrorist attacks. They're not terror if you're used to them, but on the other hand, if you accept them as not incredible violations of human rights and as not morally outrageous, that's a win for the terrorists. This attack, I think there's a very strong consensus among those who are intellectually honest, was of a different degree, not just a difference of degree, that is, but of type. And Israel has to protect itself. It has to protect the people who live there. And proportionality is a preposterous concept. It has nothing to do with how wars are fought. This is a war, and it's not pretty, and there are hard questions to ask. You mentioned that the accusation against Charlie came up in the context of questioning what the Israeli government knew and when it knew it. The people who I know who are asking that question most intensely are Israelis and relatives of Israelis. To a large extent, it's the result of, especially among the Israelis, this unjustified sense that Israel is so sophisticated and that its intelligence apparatus is so highly developed that it must have known, because it knows everything. I mean, gosh, the Jews control the weather and we can shape shift. So certainly we should know. But there's always going to be, just like the Pearl Harbor conspiracy, just like 9/11, there's always going to be someone who can outsmart. Hackers are always a step ahead of security people. Sooner or later, they're going to find that big hole. And, was there a failure here? Yes. Was it? I will say flat-footedly and without any reservations that anyone who says that the Israeli government was aware of the nature of this attack and let it go forward for some cynical reason of realpolitik is engaging in a blood libel. It is an absolutely disgusting suggestion, and there's no basis for it, and it is a truly repugnant thing to say, that a person that a government would let its own citizens, at the same, and just as the 9/11 truthers, to suggest that a government would let its own citizens die by the thousands in order to justify something that those some people believe that the leaders would do anyway and have been doing all along and don't need an excuse to do because they're so wicked. There's not even a logical consistency to these claims, but it is the kind of thing that you can say, you can accuse Americans of, and you can accuse Jews of. And anti-Americanism and anti-Semitism often track very, very.
It's interesting for me. It's like Elon Musk had said recently that, essentially the news is pretty much them, regurgitating what they've seen on X. And, you see everything going on X, and that kind of dialogue back and forth. And I almost wonder if that's the Charlie Kirk issue too. Is it because, Charlie's kind of a firebrand? And I feel like everybody wants to go so hardcore on social media it doesn't even matter the topic. It's like go all in, and it just creates that energy in a way. Half the time, I don't even think most of people, they should probably check what they're posting before they post it. You know what I mean? Because I noticed you, Ron, you posted a bunch of cases, retweeted a bunch of cases on your X, and it is interesting, like reading them. It's like, wow, what was the person thinking posting that? And like, where's this? What kind of energy is this to begin with, especially for people that, quite frankly, really have no connection to it other than reading it? I'm very fascinated by that half the time.
There's something that has happened to Western civilization as a result of social media. And you can't say, I wish there were no such thing as social media, not just because it's inevitable that technology will take us where it takes us, but that highly enhanced forms of immediate communication are inevitable, whether they take the form of Twitter, no matter what they look like. We're no longer held down by the chains of time and space. We are therefore facing different kinds of moral challenges. As a free speech lawyer, we spend a lot of time on is the question of anonymity. There is a constitutional right to speak anonymously, and in fact, we wouldn't have a constitution if it were not for anonymous speech. On the other hand, as a lawyer who also does a lot of defamation work and who has been very active in the reputation space for many years, anonymity gives people a certain degree of unearned courage. People say things 100%. They would never say to another person to their face. And that is a challenge. It's not, you can't put the genie back in the bottle and say, we ought to do something about that. We ought to stop that. You can't. This is the world we live in. But we need to find a way behaviorally as a society to figure out how do we adjust this change in our ability to communicate and to almost read people's minds without the traditional accountability that comes from the risk that you take of opening your mouth and saying something obnoxious to someone who.
So many people like to comment, but then once you start getting into like things like a Twitter space, right? Those same people don't always jump in those. It's that uncomfortable nature of actually then speaking, voicing your opinion that way. I find it even goes farther when you want them to actually go on video, like a Zoom, and actually, debate and speak to someone. I think it's interesting. The internet's interesting in that respect.
Yeah, this has been such a fascinating conversation with you, Ron Coleman. I had like a bunch of other questions. I knew it was going to fly by. So, I mean, that just means you have to come back on later.
Because thank you very much.
I know. There's always these other tangents you can go on that are fascinating.
Always leave them wanting more.
People can have more of you, following you on X. You have roncoleman.com. And then how do we access your podcast?
My podcast is called Culmination. Just Ron Coleman Lawyer Podcast. Google it. You'll find me. I actually kind of took the month off because of the Jewish holidays, and then we came out of the holidays into this mess. So I'll no new episodes until November. But thank you very much for the opportunity to chat with you guys. It's great. Best of luck with the baby. My 4 babies and their babies in my house yesterday, and this is what life is really about. Not this nonsense. We need to keep living and to keep encouraging life and to reject evil. That means that's what evil requires. We can't tolerate it. It has to be rejected.
100%.
Good way to close. Thank you,
welcome.
Ron. All right, folks. We have got to hit our break.